Morning. I have a number of visitors with us, and we're so glad that you are here. We're grateful for the opportunity to come together to worship our God together, and you are our honored guest, and we look forward to the opportunity to get to know you just a little bit better. If you will, be turning in your Bibles to Psalm 16. Psalm 16. I remember as a teenager, me and a friend of mine, we used to go down to Big Creek Bottom. It was down below my granddad's house. And we would go down there and we would camp out overnight. We would camp out sometimes most of the weekend down in this creek bottom. As a matter of fact, the only way that we could get to this was riding our four-wheelers up the oil top. We would hang a left at the T, then we would go down into the creek bottom and we would turn back into the woods. And we would drive our four-wheelers some 3/4 of a mile to close to a mile back into the woods. Well, when we found this spot, we decided, you know what, this is the perfect campsite. It was a peninsula in the creek, and we thought, wow, we have water on 3 sides, right? Well, the water was only about 1 foot deep, so anything could come in at any given point from any direction, but we thought it was real cool. Well, we took machetes and we cleared the face of this peninsula off. We cleaned it up, and we dug a hole in the ground, and there were trees, and we hung our hammocks in the trees, and we would sleep there overnight camping down in Big Creek Bottom. Well, it did pretty good most of the time. But as it got cooler and moved closer to winter, you can only imagine sleeping in a hammock, how the cool breeze hits your back. You're not so warm at night. So we would take sleeping bags and we would put our sleeping bag to either side of the fire, and we'd stoke the fire up at night and we would sleep by the fire. And that was pretty good. But you would wake up and you would be drenched from the dew through the night, or sometimes a light sprinkle, and the fire is out and it's cold. Not the most pleasant way to wake up, but we survived. Well, we decided to take tents. And in our tents, we were down there, and I remember this one night waking up somewhere around 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's pouring down rain. The bottom has fell out. And it's raining so hard, and I remember on our way in, some of these sloughs already had probably 2 feet of water in them. And I knew this bottom floods out pretty quickly. And I thought, we better get out of here. So we gathered all our stuff, we got on our four-wheelers, we're headed out, and I remember going through places where the headlights on the four-wheeler went underwater coming out of there, but we made it. We made it back to my mom and dad's house. We went into the warm house, and were able to get dry. Well, it was times like that, camping trips or experiences like that, that made me appreciate so much more our lease we had out south of town. You see, our deer lease out south of Lake Cypress Springs, it had a 2-story cabin. It had a nice cabin, and it didn't matter if it was raining. You had a roof over your head. It didn't matter if the wind was blowing. You were warm laying in your cot with your sleeping bag with the heater on. You slept fine all night long. You had protection. You had comfort. There was peace of mind. Well, in starting to make some spiritual application, oftentimes when we look through the Scripture, when we think about how God is spoke of in the Psalms, when we think about how He's spoke of in the Proverbs and even by some of the prophets, how our God is this shelter, how our God is this shield of protection, how our God is this stronghold, much similar to the image that we have on the screen, that He is this fortress, and even oftentimes, as just read, He is spoke of as our refuge. You know, if I was camping in a location that was real heavy and dense in forest, that was close to the mountains, if I had a strong shelter, I'm going to receive protection even from the predators that are there in the night. Bears or wolves or mountain lions or things of that nature. I can easily understand by taking refuge into God and finding this strong shelter that I can be protected from that spiritual adversary, that lion who is roaming about seeking whom he might devour, 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 8. Well, at the end of the day, you might have to ask, okay, well, I understand all this, but how is it that I find this place of safety? How is it that I begin to take refuge in the Lord? Well, the first thing I would say in coming into Psalm 16, verses 1 through 4, we're going to see how David makes note that we are to put trust in Him. Now, as we go through this first 4 verses, understand this, he's going to speak of his relationship to God. That's going to affect his relationship to God's people, but he's going to draw a strong line, a line of separation from those of the world and those who worship these other gods. All right? Look at the first 4 verses, Psalm 16. Preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. O my soul, you have said to the Lord, you are my Lord. My goodness is nothing apart from you. As for the saints who are on earth, they are the excellent ones in whom is all my delight. Their sorrows, here's the distinction now separating from God's people to those who chase after other gods. He says, verse 4, their sorrows shall be multiplied who hasten after other gods. Their drink offering of blood I will not offer, nor take up their names on my lip. Now, thinking about this idea of trying to take refuge in God and recognizing that there is a need for me to put my trust in Him if I'm going to be able to do that. If you look there in verse 1 and consider even how David says this, in the New King James he says, preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust. Well, in many other translations you might find something similar to this. Preserve me, O God, for I take refuge in thee. And we can very easily make the connection in this trusting in God, applying it to our refuge in God, that there is trust that has to come along with that. Well, what does it look like? What does my trusting in God actually look like? Well, David explains it this way. It looks like us committing to Him, committing to the Lord. If you look again at verse 2, how he says, O my soul, you have said to the Lord, you are my Lord. Now, you might read that and very easily gloss right over it, but there is a sign of commitment that is seen in the words penned by David when he wrote this song. If you look at it and consider it this way, when you see him say, speaking of his soul, he says, you have said to the Lord, it's all caps. And then it says, you are my Lord, capital L, lowercase O-R-D. There's a distinction in terminology that he's using here. He says, you, Yahweh, my God, are Adonai, my master. That's a sign of commitment. He recognizes the Lord as his master. It's not someone he considers as his equal. It's not someone he considers who answers to him or a mere companion in life, but rather he is the master of his life. He is Yahweh. And that is commitment. You think about how Jesus would say, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? Luke chapter 6 and verse 46. Even in that language, in the Greek language, that carries with it the idea of master, master. And why do you do not the things that I say? You see, we are to be His disciples. We are to follow His instruction. That is commitment. Jesus said, if anyone serves me, let him follow me. It's not the other way around. He says, if anyone serves me, my Father will honor him. We receive the honor from our commitment unto Him. John chapter 12 and verse 26. And something that we ought to keep in mind. Something that we need to know deep down within our hearts, within our minds, is that God will never be any sort of refuge. He will never be any sort of shelter in my life if He does not have complete control over my life. If He is going to be Lord of all, He has to be Lord of all, or He will not be my Lord at all. I have to commit to Him completely. But David doesn't stop there. Look what David continues, how he builds on this thought of commitment and even given reason why it is so good to commit to God. You look at verse 2. He says, speaking of his own goodness, it is nothing apart from God. He recognizes that every good thing that he has in his life and everything good that he will ever experience in his life is directed toward God, because God is the source of all good in our lives. That's James chapter 1, verse 17. Every good gift and every perfect gift comes from above. God is the source of all good. Well, if that's how we truly feel, if I commit to God like this, and I truly recognize that everything good that I have in my life comes from Him, I will have absolutely no trouble whatsoever committing my life to Him. It'll fall hand in hand. As a matter of fact, I heard a brother say it this way, speaking of God's goodness and our devotion to Him. As a matter of fact, it is when we begin to doubt His goodness that we entertain the idea of not following Him. When we doubt His goodness, we entertain the idea of not following Him. Was that not exactly how it took place in the garden? Was that not exactly how Eve turned away from God for a moment when Satan came with this accusation against God, and all of a sudden Eve begins to question whether or not God had her good in His mind? or at least to whether or not God was withholding some good thing from her by saying that you cannot eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was questioning his goodness. And then she was willing to turn away for a moment. We have to see that goodness and recognize it for what it is, because doubting God's goodness can lead us to sin. I need to see him as my master. I need to understand that he wants what's absolutely best for me in my life. I need to understand that he is the source of everything good that I will ever have. And I need to commit to him wholeheartedly. And I will have no problem doing the things that he wants me to do. That's commitment to him. But if I am committed to him, then we will also see, even as David speaks, that we will be committed to his people. My commitment to him will then go toward my commitment to his people. Look at what David says in verse 3. As for the saints who are on earth, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. I want you to think about it for a minute. And I want you to consider your brothers and sisters in Christ. I want you to consider those who also bear the name Christian. And I want you to think about how it is that you feel about them and how it is that you long possibly to be with them, to share that time of fellowship. Does it model that of Acts chapter 2, verse 41 through 47, where they were together day in and day out? They were breaking bread. They were praying together. They were given of the means to help one another. They wanted that fellowship with one another. When you look at your brethren, do you think delight? When you look at your brethren in that time with them, do you think of excellence? Well, you might say, you know what, there's some brethren who maybe the first word that comes to my mind when I think about them is not excellent. Maybe it's the case, some brethren, the first thing that I think of when I think about them is definitely not delight. I heard a brother say it this way, because sometimes, yes, we will have differences with our brethren, and sometimes there will be difficulties that we have to overcome. But I heard a brother say this: when you think about your brethren and that relationship that you share with them, think much about your children. Not that you parent over them in any sense like that, but think about it like your children, especially small children. Think about one of those small children who might do this. When you tell them, don't you dare touch that, and they stand there and they look you eye to eye and they reach out and they touch, right? Or maybe you tell them, look, don't get into that. 5 minutes later, they drove everything that was in there out, even after you said don't do it. They do things that make you want to say, I've had it up to here. They may take a marker and color on the floor, color on the wall, color on the refrigerator, but you're not going to get rid of them because they're yours. You love them. What about our brethren? Sometimes we need to have that kind of grace and that kind of mercy even for our brethren, and recognize that they are the excellent ones in our lives. It may be the case that, yes, I have to deal with Brother Grumpy Gus, maybe Sister Nitpicker, right? Maybe I have to deal with Brother Tongue Wagger. Maybe I have to deal with Sister Know-It-All, right? There's going to be times where I deal with these individuals, but I'm going to extend grace because these are the excellent ones in this life. We have committed together to God, and we are striving daily together to be the excellent ones here on this earth. Commit to his people. Now watch the distinction that David makes in comparison to those who chase after these other gods. Verse 4, he says, their sorrows shall be multiplied who hasten after other gods. Their drink offerings of blood I will not offer, nor take up their names on my lips. Now David is making a very distinct distinction here between those who follow God and those who are out in the world chasing after these other gods. He says those who do not follow God, they will have sorrows, and they will have sorrows multiplied in their lives. And he says, I want nothing to do with it. I want no part of it. He says, I will have no part in their offerings. You will not find me bowing the knee at their altars. You will not find me in any sense of worship with them. You won't even so much as hear their names on my lip, David says. He will have no part in worshiping their gods. He will have no part in their offerings. He will have no part in their sorrows. If my commitment to God is where it should be, then my commitment begins to grow for my brethren like it should be. And that will provide within me the strength to stand strong on the Word of God without apology in every matter of life, looking to Him for His instruction and His guidance in all parts of life. And not by any means bowing the knee to the altars of the 21st century. My commitment to Him will keep me from bowing down to the altar of homosexuality. My trust and my commitment in Him will keep me from bowing down to the altar of this woke generation, to the altar of this modern gender ideology or modern identity ideologies. I will not bow the knee to the altar of abortion. I will not bow the knee to any of these things as it pertains to the world, because I am committed to God and I am committed to His people. I will love Him with all of my heart and all of my soul and all of my strength. But David doesn't stop there. He reminds us that we need to be content in Him, not only trusting in Him, not only committed to Him, but also content in Him. Look at verses 5 through 8. O Lord, you are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. The lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. I will bless the Lord who has given me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night seasons. I have set the Lord always before me. Because He is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. I want us to understand what it means to be content in Him. Because we spoke just a few moments ago about how every good thing that we will experience in this life and every good that we will have comes from God, because He is the source of good. A real temptation that we have to face as Christians is this, that I don't become content in the blessings that He has given me, but I maintain my looking toward Him and staying content in Him who gave the blessings. And David says, you are my portion, you are my cup, you are my everything. And the matter is this, if David was stripped away with everything that he had, it didn't matter, because he still had God, and that should be enough. Think about Job. Naked I come out of my mother's womb, naked I will return. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord, Job chapter 1 and verse 21. Content in Him. Well, how do I do this? I take satisfaction in His person. You look there at verse 5 and listen how David explains this and shows how he is content with Him. He says, O Lord, you are the portion of my inheritance and my cup. You maintain my lot. What David is saying here is the Lord is my nourishment. The Lord is my sustenance. He says, I take satisfaction in the giver of the gifts, not in the gifts that are given by the giver. Don't get me wrong, he enjoyed the blessings. He appreciated the blessings. But his satisfaction was found in the very nature of God. And even if God were to take everything that he had, he would still have lost nothing, because he still had God. Content, satisfied with his person. Listen how he continues to explain this, verse 6. He says, the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. Yes, I have a good inheritance. Now, if you could take with that, verse 5, the last part of that verse where it says, you maintain my lot, consider these lines that he's speaking of that have fallen, and as well as this good inheritance. It's an interesting way for him to further his point about him being content with God's person. Because it's reminiscent, the language is reminiscent of when God gave all the tribes of Israel their land allotments. We'll think about it in that sense and look even back to Numbers chapter 18. In Numbers chapter 18, listen to how the Lord speaks to Aaron. Now, speaking to Aaron, he would have been speaking to all the Levites. But here's what he says, pertaining their portion, pertaining their lot. Numbers 18, verse 20, then the Lord said to Aaron, you shall have no inheritance in their land, nor shall you have any portion among them. They didn't receive a land allotment like the rest of the tribes, but rather, watch what happens. He says, I am your portion and your inheritance among the children of Israel. David speaks in the sense that he doesn't care about the land allotment. He doesn't care about the physical lines that have been drawn. He's talking about his close-knit connection and fellowship that he has with God, and that's what he's content in, that he is his portion. But he takes satisfaction also in his guidance. You look at verse 7. He says, I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel. My heart also instructs me in the night season. Now we understand, of course, God gives us counsel. He gives us guidance in our lives. He guides our steps through this life that we live in by His Word, right? The lamp unto our feet, the light unto our path, Psalm 119 and verse 105. And if we find delight in the law of the Lord, and it is something that we meditate upon day and night, Psalm 1 and verse 2, His law, His Word becomes part of us, and it resides deep within our hearts. And no matter if it is the darkest hour, we will still find comfort, we will still find guidance, we will still find instruction, because His Word is deep within our hearts. We need not lay weary, tossing and turning. We have comfort through His instruction, and we can take satisfaction in that. But third, He takes satisfaction in His presence. Verse 8, now David's faith, it springs forth from God's nearness in his life. Verse 8, he says, I have set the Lord always before me. He's making it known that he will always have the Lord close to him. He will always have Him right there close by. And you think about even Psalm 84 and verse 10, how it was said, I would rather be a doorkeeper in the house of God than dwell in the tents of the wicked. The man writing that psalm says, look, I don't care if it's the worst seat in the house of the Lord, I'll take it over anything else that is out there. I want that closeness. I want that presence of God in my life. Well, David experienced things, right? You might remember some of the Psalms where David might have spoken in the sense where he felt as if God was distant. Psalm 10 and verse 1, Psalm 13 and verse 1, Psalm 22 and verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? There were times his emotions led him to feel as if God was distant, but he knew He was close. He appreciated God's presence in his life. And because of that satisfaction of the Lord being ever before him, he was able to say, because He is at my right hand, I shall not be moved. Now, it's important to catch this, how David says this about the Lord being at his right hand. Because oftentimes we think about that, and it's a place of privilege, it's a place of authority, it's a place of the highest privilege and exaltation that someone could put somebody in their lives. And David is saying, I have given the Lord this choice place in my life at my right hand. Take that back to verse 1. You are my God. You are my master. And every good thing that I have in my life comes from You. Complete commitment. Satisfied with His nearness in his life. Finally, because of our willingness to trust in Him, because of our willingness to be content with Him, we will then have confidence in Him. If you look at verses 9 through 10, it's going to explain this confidence that is seen not only in his present life as he writes this psalm, but also in the life that is to come, life everlasting. Verse 9, it says, therefore, my heart is glad and my glory rejoices. My flesh will also rest in hope, for You will not leave my soul in Sheol, nor will You allow Your Holy One to see corruption. David is confident, and he has confidence in the hope that God provides. It's not something that is only pointing to this life. Yes, He is this refuge. He is this place of safety. He is this shield of protection that we can have in this life, and we can rejoice over that. We can be excited about that. But it goes far beyond that. David says, even my flesh will rest in hope, because he knows one day the transformation that will take place in his life. He knows one day the resurrection will come and he'll be with the Lord, and he takes hope in that. He has confidence in that. But he also has confidence in the life that he gives. Verse 11. It says, You will show me the path of life. In Your presence is the fullness of joy. At Your right hand are pleasures forevermore. You see, it's not just about what God has to offer in this life. It's all pointing to a life lived with God in the after. He pointed to the very fact that He would not allow His Holy One to see corruption. He rests in that hope of the resurrection, and he understands that it is the Lord that has shown us the path to life, and He's willing to submit to that path in hopes that one day He will be with him in His presence in the fullness of joy. And watch how he transitions this. Remember how he had said that the Lord was at his right hand as he lived? He's longing for the day that he will be at the Lord's right hand in this place of high exaltation, in this place of great regard and respect. That's how David longs for the Lord. That's how David takes refuge in the Lord. Let's close with this thought. Let's say that your shelter, your spiritual shelter, let's say that its durability is founded upon how strong your faith is in God. Let's say that it worked like that. That your place of safety, this shelter, this refuge, was solely based upon your faith, and that's how strong this shelter would be. Would you merely be hanging in a hammock down in the woods? Would you at least have a tent possibly over you to cover you from the elements? Would you merely be sleeping on the ground based upon your faith for God? Or would you truly be resting in such a stronghold, even as what we see here on the slides? My taking refuge in Him demands my trusting in Him, demands my being content in Him, and then I have all the confidence that follows from everything that God is willing to offer. But I have to be willing to make that commitment. It may be the case that you've never even yet took the opportunity to find yourself finding this place of refuge. It may be the case that your commitment, it may be the case that your devotion has fallen and you need to come back to that home, that place of safety. We can help you with that. But you have to be willing to commit to Him. You have to be willing to be satisfied with Him. You have to be willing to trust in Him, and you have to be willing to turn to Him. The door's open. He's there. He wants to help you along the way. Wherever you are this morning, maybe it's the case you need help. Maybe it's the case that you've wandered away from that shelter, or you've never even found that shelter. Whatever the case may be, take the opportunity. Find that encouragement we discussed in Bible class from your brothers and sisters, and be built up, be encouraged, and made ready to continue on this walk of life that we have as Christians, as sons and daughters of God. If you have any need, please let it be known as together we stand and as we sing.